हिंदुस्तान का कोई कोना ऐसा होगा कि सदियों तक चली हुई आजादी की इस जंग में किसी ने योगदान न दिया हो, लेकिन दुर्भाग्य यह है कि इनके त्याग, शौर्य और बलिदान की कहानियां नई पीढ़ी तक पहुंची ही नहीं। भगवान बिरसा मुंडा ने अंग्रेजों से न केवल राजनीतिक आजादी के लिए संघर्ष किया, बल्कि आदिवासियों के सामाजिक और आर्थिक अधिकारों के लिए भी लड़ाई लड़ी। वंचितों और शोषितों के अंधेरे से भरे जीवन में सूरज की तरह चमक बिखेरी।
Thank you everybody for being present over here as we hold conversation with the legendary Tuhin Sinha on his book, The Legend of Birsa Munda, which he has co-authored with another Verma, Ankita Verma. So I guess this book has two Vermas revolving around it. Mona Verma talking to Tuhin Sinha on the book co-authored with Ankita Verma. So welcome Tuhin.
Thank you Mona ji, thank you for all the kindness all the time.
Everybody has heard the name of the revolutionary Birsa Munda, but still, yet it remains to be a lesser known name. Considering that all civilizations started with tribes, हमारी जितनी संस्कृति है वो जनजातियों से उसका आह्वान हुआ. Yet there are so many people who do not know about those unsung heroes and all those struggles which were never documented. So we needed the heroes of today to document a book as brilliant, as insightful, and take us back in time and open our eyes to what actually was the history of India. And not just the history of India that we have read in schools, but the history that is revealed to us now through a different lens. So, welcome to him.
Thank you.
My first question to you is that with two parallel passions, one as a writer and the one as a politician, which one aces over the other, the author or the politician? And how do you borrow from these passions when you are a politician? Where does a writer come in? When you are writing, where does a politician come in?
Well, there are many other things that I am. Obviously, which the world does not know. But my writing lately in the last 2 or 3 years has been an extension of the socio-political narrative prevailing in the country. And so, the two complement each other, at least for me at this point of time. Of course, in the evening, I go beyond the social narratives, socio-political narratives that I create and have to respond to all the accusations made by the Congress party against us. But that's a different thing. But like from starting with Of Love and Politics, which was my third book, while my writing may reflect my ideological, leaning, I think somewhere I have made a conscious effort not to be judgmental. For example, I'll give you an example. In Birsa Munda, there are portions in the book where Birsa Munda's parents are constantly going through the dilemma of whether to convert to Christianity or not.
Right.
Where I have kind of created conversation between the father and mother. The mother has a different point of view. The father has a different point of view. The idea was to bring forth both the perspectives. One is that of predatory proselytization being the vice that it is. The other of the Adivasi population of that era somewhere also being vulnerable to realize that maybe it's the way out of the present mess. It's some form of empowerment. So that way, without being judgmental, I do make a conscious effort to put forth different perspectives. And I think that is where I draw a line even though that may be slightly nebulous between the writer and between the politician.
Right, wonderful answer, because it is such a beautiful confluence out there, and it is always good to see both the perspectives as a writer as well as a politician. There. So, but when it comes to the marginalized communities of India, there is a dearth of knowledge. Not very many people know about the tribal revolutionaries. Do you think it was a deliberate attempt to keep this out of the curriculum all along?
See, history, there are two ways to look at it. History has always been written from the point of view of rulers.
Right.
And so in fact the subaltern revolutionaries were never really documented in the right way when they were alive. And most of them led very short lives. They were killed by the time they were 25, 30, 35.
Right.
I don't recall too many of them having lived beyond 40 years of age. Because they obviously did not enjoy government protection or whatever. Rather, they were at the firing line, they were the victims of the firing line. So, whatever information subsequently came out, I mean, most of the information which came out about them, loud. Okay. माइक का कुछ इशू है क्या? अभी ठीक है?
हाँ, it's okay.
Okay. So whatever information came out about these tribal revolutionaries mostly came out after the death. And about 20, 30 years, I mean, that's when it started coming out. So dearth of information, authentic information about them was always a challenge. And that is one of the reasons why we took a call of not keeping it as an entirely non-fiction book. So it's a novel. While we are as true to the character of Birsa Munda as possible, based upon all the information available in public domain, all the history material available around him, plus from whatever information I gathered from people of his community living in the same village. But beyond that, when it comes to the secondary characters, as in Father Hoffman, who was the main villain, who was the main, the guy responsible for conversions. That is where I have taken certain liberties to make the characters more interesting, to make the story more palatable for the younger generation.
Yeah, I feel, like every narrative has like 4 pillars. So we have a great editor sitting amongst us, an erudite one. So you have the dialogues, you have emotions, and you have the settings and the objects. So if you're using any one of those verticals to make your story more appealing, what's the harm? While not deviating from the mainstay of what really happened. So I think that is what makes the book very, very interesting, instead of making it very didactic or preachy out there. So that's wonderful. And also when one reads a book, there are uncanny similarities between the lives of Birsa Munda and Subhash Chandra Bose in terms of their leadership paradigm. Could you please elaborate on that?
So writer has the liberty to think beyond what is obvious. And since Subhash Chandra Bose launched, Birsa Munda in the years 1899 to 1900 basically launched a private army of tribals across many villages who took upon the Britishers. Now Subhash Chandra Bose launched a private army on an international scale 40 years later.
Right.
So my sense is that since they, basically they were born barely 200 kilometers apart from each other, and hearsay used to be a very important form of information in those days. Somewhere, it is quite possible that Subhash Chandra Bose was inspired by the bravery of this largely, semi-educated tribal who, in fact, Suresh Prabhu was at one of the online launch events of our book cover. And he was very intrigued by the abilities of Birsa Munda at a time when there was no communication facility, no communication facility in the villages, and at the same time he was constantly under the radar. So my sense is that if Subhash Chandra Bose launched a private army and executed something similar on a grand international scale, I mean, quite possible that the bravery of Birsa Munda may have inspired him in certain ways. Obviously, I mean, it requires more research to corroborate this. But as a writer, I am entitled to, expand the thought process.
And also, like Subhash Chandra Bose also had the support of the likes of General Shahnawaz Khan and
Absolutely.
other people. When it comes to a tribal, it's like, what kind of support do you have? So, one question that came to my mind while reading up on your work was that it is understandable when, there were mutinies in Meerut or Kanpur during that time. That is understandable. But how was it possible for a tribal with absolutely no facilities or the luxuries of communication to garner that kind of humongous support in the hinterland, from the hinterland? How was it possible?
I'm generally philosophizing about life. जब आपको बहुत ज़्यादा धक्का दिया जाता है और आपको पता है कि पीछे एक खाई है, तो उस समय आपके सारे डर खत्म हो जाते हैं. वो आज भी हो रहा है लोगों में. So Birsa Munda is an emotion. Today's Birsa Munda could be a person working in the corporate world who is absolutely frustrated with all the persecution or office politics and decides to do something completely afresh. Similarly, Birsa Munda, at that point of time, given the way the community had been harassed, given the way they had been punished through all forms of, whether it was excessive taxation, whether it was taking away, humiliating the women or whatever.
Right.
I think a point had come where they had nothing to lose, and when you have nothing to lose, you give it back very hard, which is what I think that is where that revolution even took the Britishers by surprise. The Britishers never thought that the Adivasi community, who were already short of resources, who had already been subjugated,
could ever rise.
Yeah.
Could rise to that level.
And that is why Birsa Munda's story becomes a big learning experience for everybody. The oppressors today, the people who are in the position of Birsa Munda.
Yes, certainly. There speaks a married man when he says that when you're pushed into the corner, all you can do is retaliate and you lose all sense of fear out there, isn't it? Coral will be happy if she hears the recording. So also, coming back to the topic.
I admire your ability to draw analogies, connect unrelated issues.
I'm a mutual friend, so I can, and I see all those posts and speak to her often as well. So part of the North.
I have warned her that I'll sue her if she posts something about me without taking my consent. So the posts have reduced.
No, but the talking hasn't. Don't worry. So even the parts of the Northeast in India also face, the same apathy. So once ignored, they fell prey to the missionaries who, because they gave them a sense of belonging. So it was a move from the sense of unbelonging. And do you think that is the sense of unbelonging was the main reason for them to embrace Christianity? Even for the tribals?
Financial suppression was the main reason. Financial suppression was the main reason. In fact, every proselytization activity which happens even in present day has a monetary incentive. If you look at it, in fact, the sad part or the ironical part is that in the same areas of Jharkhand today, predatory proselytization is almost as active, with incentives like free food or free. So I think financial, the Britishers basically, when it came to the rural parts of the country, basically employed two means of oppression. One was financial suppression, and when they realized that financial suppression was also inadequate, from 1850s onwards, they employed cultural subjugation through introduction of various missionaries. First it was the German missionary, and most of the missionaries were given yearly targets of conversions.
Right.
Now, obviously, both these forms of oppression were executed. Either the financial suppression was executed by landlords who were actively in sync with the Britishers.
Yeah.
The cultural subjugation was executed through the missionaries. Now the tragedy of the tribals was that every time they would try to reach out to one versus the other, they would realize that invariably the two would be connected.
Yes, the zamindars and the missionaries.
You've spoken about fund the missionaries.
Right.
So, that is where I think most of these tribal freedom fighters were pushed to a corner where the scale of their revolution was so sudden that the Britishers were completely taken aback. They
Yeah.
never anticipated that a failed community or a suppressed community could launch something of that nature.
With a buoyant force.
Yeah.
With such a
And now
buoyant force.
that we have, a trilogy would be complete in June with another story next June. In fact, there are so many brilliant ideas which have been coming forth. Like I was discussing with my publisher, somebody came up with the idea of somebody came up with the idea of doing a 10 management principles from the lives of
Birsa Munda.
or
And
other
all
tribal
of that.
freedom fighters.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, with the limited resources with which they fought, there is so much to learn from their lives.
Yeah, even as a corporate trainer, I hear you here because, when we talk about time management and the Eisenhower principle can be matrix, can be so beautifully explained with how Hanuman got the
So in
Sanjeevani
fact,
tree.
I was asked to give
So-
a talk last month on learnings from the lives of tribal freedom fighters at a
Yeah.
CLO summit, which is Chief Learning Officers Summit.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, it's very fascinating to see these topics, these subaltern heroes get so much traction in the corporate community. That's a huge learning for me.
Yes, when we speak about mythology, it's like part reality, part fiction kind of a thing. But yes, when you draw from the experiences of people from our history, everybody knows it's a truth. And certainly the volume of relevance rises out there. Another thing that while you were speaking about the zamindars and the missionaries coming together, we understand the missionaries needed the money from the zamindar, but what was in it for the zamindars? Why did they give the money to the missionaries? Why did they
No,
need
the
to?
zamindars had succumbed to the Britishers. It was an open collusion. And the Britishers in fact would never visit many of these far-flung areas. So the administration was completely outsourced to the British, to the zamindars. And the zamindars saw a great, they were invested with massive powers. To retain those powers, I think it was largely to win the trust of the Britishers essentially.
Okay, so
And to
that
make
was-
sure that they had complete sway, complete domain over those tribal areas, because essentially, the Britishers anyway were, they would seldom step out of the cities or the mansions. So I think it was a complete
it was a protection,
outsourcing.
basically in return a protection.
Yeah.
To
Outsourcing, it was an outsourcing model basically.
It was an outsourcing. But another thing, while you were researching on the book, do you realize that an Naxalite movement in the country has dimmed in quite some way? And this has happened because of their integration into the mainstream politics and on the social chairs as well?
Well, the Naxalite movement, which began in the 1970s, may have had a ideology behind it. But in the last 10 or 15 years, that was reduced to a largely China-funded, move to disintegrate the country.
Very interesting. Go on.
So the ones supporting it were the extreme, left wokes. And there are two reasons why that has come to an end. One, the government has gone after the killers. Like,
Right.
killing can't be condoned no matter what
course.
your issue is.
Of course.
And the other is, integration within the country can happen through various techniques. So if tribal hamlets which had never seen shauchalayas in their homes, which had never witnessed null, tap waters, if they're suddenly getting those benefits, they are realizing that the absence of these benefits, these basic benefits, was the reason why they were feeling alienated. So today they feel merged because, the difference between the better off villages and the tribal hamlets or some of the most backward regions has come down. In fact, the aspirational district program, which includes about 182 most backward districts, which are being continuously monitored and which have a very heavy tribal population, has been a big game changer. in the entire thing.
Right, you look at the Jan Dhan Yojanas and the Ujjwala Yojanas, so it is basically a bit to get people up to the forefront, at least of basic luxuries and the
Absolutely.
basic facilities and utilities of life. But another thing that always comes to one's mind when you read about the tribal heroes is, what is the reason that, all these subaltern heroes, they become popular only after their deaths? Why this
That is
apathy
because
while
during
they
their
were
lifetime
alive?
they were persona non grata. Am
Yeah.
I pronouncing it well or correctly? Persona non grata.
Grata.
That's a completely useless person.
I know.
So during the lifetimes, they were spurned, they were looked at in a very condescending manner. Because history, history has always been written from the point of view of rulers.
Of conquerors.
But I guess this course correction should ideally have come 30 or 40 years ago. The colonial mindset which we inherited at the time of independence prolonged itself for far too long. So ideally this change that we are witnessing in the last few years should have begun in the 70s or 80s.
Yes, and you have the Prime Minister calling
That
him
was
as
your-
Bhagwan Birsa Munda, and even Gandhiji was called just Bapu. So elevating him to that pinnacle of devotion.
So
What
the
about that?
Birsa community, I think there are 1,000 or 1,500 very strong
Besides.
Birsa followers who still follow a slightly different cultural practice which is known as Birsai. So they consider him as Bhagwan, and in that particular, in those districts, the 2 or 3 districts, he is still revered as a Bhagwan. So I think to relate for the community to relate more with the Prime Minister's communication, I think the Honorable Prime Minister is a good communicator, and by mentioning as Bhagwan, the connect becomes easier with the tribal community.
But it is a very strong prefix. It's a very strong prefix to give to a human. Any reason there?
But I can assure you,
Something that we don't know?
it's not a wasted prefix. You're giving
course
it to
it is not, but a very strong one at that.
You're giving it to a person who deserves it. Ideally, he should get Bharat Ratna, which I have been demanding
Yes.
through my articles.
Yes, you have been. Birsa Munda's family converted to Christianity, and as per your book, he also converted to Christianity, but albeit for a very brief period. What made him realize that this was not the best way forward?
He had to get admission in a missionary school, and in those days there was this missionary school in Chaibasa, which is about 100 kilometers away from the village where he stayed. That was a precondition that he had to be baptized. And in fact, he went ahead with an open mind. He tried to imbibe the virtues of the Christian religion. But then when he eventually came to a conclusion that the missionaries would not go, there was nothing that could change their basic mindset, the cultural subjugation, the way they used to deride the Adivasi community, that only increased. I mean, instead of making it a win-win situation for both the Britishers and the Adivasi community, basically his conversion or the Adivasi conversion into Christianity was seen by the missionaries as a form of completely, the Adivasis completely succumbing to them.
Like a
So the
backhanded
atrocities-
attack on them, on their
So
existence.
the atrocities only increased, and there was an insult in the year 1890, which was the inflection point where he
Right.
actually publicly spurned the teachings of Christianity and came back to his village. And from being a hero who he was looked upon, it was like, in Mumbai today, if a family sends its kids to study in Oxford, then halfway down the line, if the kid is thrown out and comes back to Mumbai, how would he be seen by family members? And so that a similar situation happened in his village, from being the apple of everybody's eyes. When he came back as a loser after quitting Christianity,
Right.
he was basically spurned. People
Of
would
course.
make all kinds of taunts, and then he eventually left home. For 4 years he was in wilderness, where he was tutored, where he came in the company, the
Anand.
company of Anand Pandit Panrai,
Panrai.
Pandit who would actually teach him about Gita and Mahabharata. And then he re-emerged in his village. So I think in 25 years of age, basically he lived he lived a life which most people would live in 60 or 70 years of age, and that shows his evolutionary nature.
That's wonderful. And more about Anand Panrai, in case you would like the audience to know, because it is a very, very interesting point in his life, and this is like a watershed moment when he met Anand Panrai. More on him.
Anand Pandrai would have been the modern day Hindutva icon who would invoke teachings from Mahabharata, Gita, and
bring him
make
back
life,
to his roots.
yeah.
I mean, help people water their roots. I mean, and one who does that takes you back
Like
to
again,
where
but
you...
even despite the best of efforts, one has not been able to find out much information about him,
Anand
except that there
Pandey?
used to exist a character of this nature. Because at the end of the day, when Birsa's life is, so difficult to document, Anand Pandey was and again, some people call him Pandey, some call
It's
him
Goli
Pandey.
Pandrai, yeah.
So he was a person who he met in wilderness, so which makes his story all the more difficult to trace.
Yes, of course. I mean, because there are no documented narratives about him per se. But it's a brilliant book and a very well researched one. And it draws the attention
I
to
think,
the
our-
life.
Yeah, we
Waiting
just have a
for-
couple of minutes more to go.
Okay, yeah.
So let me
okay.
take 30 seconds to, just acknowledge the efforts of two people over here. I'm fortunate they're here. One is my editor, Rashmi, who really nurtured this book to perfection. And the other is the Marathi translator, Prajakta Chitre ji, who's present over here.
Okay. Yeah. So again,
And the book is out in 3 languages, English, Hindi, Marathi, and hopefully in the next 2 years it will be
more
out in many
languages
more
because it
regional
needs to
languages.
reach out to all the states and territories of
Yes.
India. And how will it, once it reaches out to everybody, how will it elevate the status of Jharkhand? Will it?
Yes, Jharkhand needs its identity.
It needs it identity and the book is going to help it in a very big way.
A cultural icon around a state always helps, the asmita factor.
Of course.
And without asmita, there is no politics. So.
Brilliantly said. That is a writer speaking like a politician to us today about the Asmita factor. Now writing the book with Ankita Verma as well. So when two people are co-authoring a book, there is bound to be a clash of ideologies and thought system. I did a book with my daughter and I know the kind of wars and battles. They were bigger than the battles and the bloodier than the Mahabharata itself in the house in terms of in terms of your ideology. So did you also face these clashes? And how did you
Our roles are
over them?
divided beyond the initial structuring of the book, the characterization, the chapter outlines, and don't interfere. So, when I look at it at the end of it, either I'm prepared to completely rework it, or I know that it's good enough to go for print. So we spent a lot of time rewriting the book. But I think, the end result is it's a great book.
I'm sure it is a great one. There are 3 women involved in that book, isn't it?
Probably more than that. Gayatri is an editor who really worked very hard on it. So.
Okay, so 4 women involved makes it even better. So we can throw
So the Hindi translator is also lady, so there are many women.
Maybe
so
we
many
can have a
women
couple
out
of
there.
questions from
Yes,
the
anyone
audiences.
for questions for Tuhin? Yes, Anupma?
Thank you, ma'am.
If I may, is the orange attire, that's beyond my question.
I like bright colors, that's it.
Okay. So, I see you often on TV, very vociferously defending the official
indefensible.
position, while the authors of, the anchors of the day try their valiant best trying to, do whatever they are supposed to do. But do you think the way the supposed woke or the educated people are in tune, or the way they diss the official position, what is your view on that? Is there an end to it, or it's a constant conundrum that people will face? Like if you show that, you identify with a particular position of the government in power, you are immediately dissed as a bhakt or someone who's lacking in mental, abilities. So do you see an end to that ever?
So wokeism is a state of mind, and you can't help it. It's about being unhappy when there is no need to be unhappy. So that sums up the politics as well.
And as it is, we have the Tipu Sultans and the Savarkars and Birsa Mundas coming back into our curriculum, into our mental vision and understanding, which is also commendable, isn't it? So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Like I said, ideally this course correction should have happened 3 decades ago, but
Yeah.
it's better late than never for it to begin.
you know, this goes, I would like to end this with a joke, that once we were asked in our, you know, social studies class, that मुगलों का साम्राज्य कहाँ से लेकर कहाँ तक फैला हुआ था. And one boy got up and said, from chapter number 1 to chapter number 14, and the book had 14 chapters. So that is how it went. So we needed a reawakening, we needed a rewriting of not just a book, but also the thought system. Thank you, Tuhin. We wish you all the luck. Yes.
You were mentioning about Bhagwan. I think he was called Bhagwan by his followers because he was a healer.
Yes, a preacher and a healer as well.
So addressed with Bhagwan by his followers in that era.
Okay.
Am I right?
That, but apart from that, the following which he had begun to generate in just a span of 1 year from 1894 to 1895, you know, that his village had basically become a tourist hub where people would just come to seek his darshan. Because apart from his healing powers, he also propagated certain reforms.
For whatever reason, he was addressed as.
So a mix of the two, the spiritual, the reformist avatar plus the healing powers.
Yes.
Because the healing power obviously, you know, had its, not many people were convinced about it. They felt that it was a,
Hoax.
you know.
No, but he had great knowledge of medicinal herbs. That's what I was told.
Which generally tribals do. I mean, in fact, because, you know, with the dearth of medical facilities, I guess